Welcome to By-The-Bywater, a podcast on the Megaphonic Network. I'm Ned Raggett.
I'm Oriana Schwint.
I'm Jared Pekacek.
And we're here to talk about all things J.R.R. Tolkien, his work, his inspirations and impact, creative interpretations in other media, languages, lore, rip-offs, parodies, anything we think is interesting. Thanks for joining us. Hello and welcome to the 42nd episode of By-The-Bywater. It is great to be back with you all, and ooh boy, here we go.
Oh man,
Here it comes. Here it comes.
The countdown is just, we are recording this on the Sunday before it all happens, and basically our viewpoints as to how Tolkien gets interpreted on a wide scale change yet again to some sort of thing. We will get to that shortly. Also, I've been having adventures, as some of you who have been following on social media may know about. We'll get to that too, but suffice to say, I'm tired. I know we say this every other episode, but I am tired. And on the bright side, Oriana is recovered. You are no longer plagued with the COVID.
I'm not sick. I don't have long COVID. Woo! That's
good.
We have hot water in our building again too. That's nice.
Hey, distinct advantage right there.
Yeah.
I would protest vehemently if that ever got lost. We, one time about 5 years ago, the hot water heater died right before going on a vacation. So there was one of the things like, could you replace before we come back? And I think it worked out that way, but I just can't remember now. So it just, it's a creature of civilization. I freely admit to it. I suppose we all are in our own way. Here we are recording on this thing. So
like
soft
hobbits.
and weak.
We are,
Yes.
we are creatures of comfort.
We totally are. But, oh my goodness, so much to talk about, too much to talk about, and a subject of discussion for the episode too. And we did hope you caught our live webcast, the kitchen party that was hosted on Megaphonic a week ago. That was very good fun. We will, of course, have a link to that in our show notes, and it is kind of lead in for the general topic for today. But first, we got news. Oh boy, we got news. So, Jared, as always, please take it away.
There's a lot of news. To say that Amazon has piled on the promotional overdrive for the Rings of Power at this point is to heavily understate. The initial embargo has been lifted on reactions, but we're still we're still waiting to see it for ourselves here in a few days. Meantime, a couple of stories have emerged in terms of how much Amazon has riding on the show, and that could well determine what happens next, even if it isn't a success, even if we never know if it is. There's a small bit of news from the Warner Brothers anime film that UK actor Alex Jordan is part of the cast, playing a character named Lord. I don't know. It's Old English freaked, invented for the story, but with no further details yet. Otherwise, to make the overall rights situation even more tangled, a Swedish video game and media company Embracer, who also hold rights to Dark Horse Comics, Borderlands, and the like, has bought Middle-earth Enterprises, the source of Hobbit and Lord of the Rings rights previously held for decades by the Saul Zaentz Company. Per the press announcement, besides continuing financial interest in both the Amazon and Warner Brothers productions, they're interested in additional movies based on iconic characters such as Gandalf, Aragorn, Gollum, Galadriel, Éowyn, and other characters. Meantime, the Marquette University exhibition, J.R.R. Tolkien, The Art of the Manuscript, has now formally opened and will be running through December, along with upcoming associated lectures, as previously mentioned some episodes back. We'll have more information about all that in our show notes.
We will. And of course, the thing that I have to say is, I was there, man. So
He was there.
I was there. I can speak to it. I was very lucky enough to be able to swing, being able to go. It was a literal dash in, dash out in almost practical terms. As my mom was saying to me today, it's like, you basically went and did all that just so you could be there for an hour. And I went, yes. But without getting into that, that involves, suffice to say that it was a real treat, very much so. I really enjoyed being able to go to the exhibition. It is indeed running through December, so there's plenty of time. The nice thing about it is that there is an associated publication of the same name, exhibition catalog, very nice hardbound, a literal Red Book of Westmarch. They made that joke practically as I was buying it, so that's nice. And it's good to see, precisely because the focus of the exhibition, as the title and the announcements are, as opposed to the Bodleian / Morgan exhibition from 2018-2019, 2019, which a lot of people saw if you were in the UK or if you were in New York or ventured to it. Oriana had a chance to see that too, as did I. That was more of an overall, what is the word? Overview of his life, I guess is the way to put it. Mementos and things, just covering everything, his own creative work and other things as well. A little more flashy in terms of public display, you could argue. Maximal visual impact in the best way. Very well designed, really nice. This is much more stripped down in comparison. It is very much, you could say, for a hardcore Tolkien scholar. You don't go in expecting there's a nice little setup outside with a couple of banners and things, sort of let you know, you're in the right spot. If you turn the corner, you're like, oh, Eärendil, Thing of Moria. Clearly this is the building. but inside it's essentially 3 rooms, 2 initial room, the big sort of center room, and then a follow room, and that's it. It does take about an hour to go through at a good, easy pace to read through and check out everything. But it was so worth it. It really, really was. It wasn't merely focusing on excerpts or selections from the manuscript holdings, which of course Marquette has famously had now since the late 50s for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and Farmer Giles of Ham. I forgot that was included as well there. But a lot of context around it was the key thing. There were various samples of everything from, for instance, field manual training about how to sort of create maps in World War I, which is where Tolkien probably got a lot of, they pretty much indicate, got a lot of his training for his own initial maps, as opposed to the Christopher redrawn maps that was our focus there. So that was just an interesting little, okay, now I get a real tactile sense of it. But on a broader front, made a really good demonstration of case about how the popularization of, you could say, antiquity studies and older manuscripts and studies and interest in both, medieval levels and also Anglo-Saxon, etc. levels, prehistory, Gothic, etc. How technology in Victorian times, the actual photographic reproduction of manuscripts and putting that on a mass level really helped sort of popularize the idea of what was out there and drawing connections in terms of what Tolkien would have learned from as an interested young scholar, as an interested young reader, as much as other people did too, about this material. And sort of it gave a sort of grounding like, okay, you get sort of a sense of this is what Tolkien would have absorbed in his studies and his readings and just and what was out there already for some decades before he started his own work. Some very interesting examples there. And of course, just being able to see, the manuscript presentations of, how the emphasis, as I said, was the art of the manuscript. So rather than simply showcasing, hey, here's a typed out manuscript, they had a couple examples of that. It was the examples of him drawing out how the gate evolved, the Gate of Moria, the unpublished letter from Aragorn to San from the epilogue that was never formally published at the time, redrawn in Tangwar and other things like that, and various levels of that. There were definitely things there that I'm sure I read about maybe in History of Middle-earth, but I'd never actually seen before. That was the nice thing about it. And that, again, is the reason why I highly recommend, if you don't have a chance to go, if you're in the upper Midwest, you should definitely go. So if you have a chance to get there, and again, you have until December. But the catalog with that reproduces pretty much everything that was on display, and it's lovely. It is a wonderful addition to have, and I think is a good way to sort of bring Tolkien a little more, closer to you. And just a reminder again, and the Morgan exhibitors like this, Oriana can confirm, some of the papers he wrote on are really small. It was like the paper shortage of World War II. It was one of those things like, man, he packed in a lot. So maps is mentioned, some of his illustrations as well, but again, the focus is elsewhere. One other thing, too, I'll add that was a really nice thing was some details about something I was unaware of. The end of the exhibition was a concentration on what Marquette does in terms of having preserved and stored and, put forth the manuscripts over time. They had a demonstration of how to search by microfilm, which I loved. I'm like, flashback to the 80s. That's great. But they also talked about something I was unaware of, and they maybe only just publicly announced. I could be wrong. The wording of it made it seem like that was the case, is a new internally organized, but presumably, hopefully from wider access, computer database called, the system's called Anduin, which was intentionally chosen, which is basically showing, and there was a wonderful demonstration of it, showing a comparison of of how all the manuscripts flow and go together, what is where, how you can track wording and use and things like that through all the manuscripts. Very detailed, very much more on the scholarly end, but it was something to see. They really have put a huge amount of effort over all the stuff that they've accumulated literally over decades, since Christopher Tolkien provided extra manuscript material over time as he was doing his sorting and working through all the papers as well. And it's a reminder that if nothing else, Tolkien is one of the best, you could say, accounted for authors, because all this material is there and has been so thoroughly reviewed. And to get a sense of the actual creative process, especially, these days, you check your Google Docs revision history or things like that, and who knows how long that lasts. Here is something a little more concrete, and they're still, in some respects, still fine-tuning and getting a sense of things like, undiscovered early drafts and other things like that that are still being added and being understood in the whole thing. So, and given the swirl of all the other news and everything else happening, it was good just for a reminder, just goes like, it was one guy, a dedicated scholar, but one guy at night writing this out in the midst of separate falls of the stuff and everything that came from that. It was a very good perspective. It all comes back to this type thing. So highly recommended. Do check it out. Various news reports and things on it that are fun. We'll link those in show notes. It is great. So and there are the upcoming 3 lectures that are going to be done. Carl Hostetter, John Garth, and I forget the woman's name, but she wrote the recent book about Tolkien relations and his knowledge of modern authors at the time, which I think is a really good angle. Those lectures are going to be coming up. They will be live streamed and I believe archived. So it's the type of thing that if you're not there, there's a way to access it. I think it'll be a really good run of stuff. I'm looking forward to that. So that's all the hardcore stuff. But then there's everything else. Oh, my goodness. Where to begin? That Embracer news about how they want to develop like the Tolkien cinematic universe or whatever.
Yeah, no, I'm not there for that.
No. Stop it. Just smack their little hands.
Leave it alone.
We are entering in a real Wild West here if they're going to seriously do that. And the thing is, I think they are. And that brings us to a bizarre situation where we arguably will have 3 rights-holding organizations trying to extend what they've got in terms of the rights, because Warner Brothers, I don't think, is going to let things go.
No.
I think they're going to keep trying to find things. Amazon, we all know about Amazon. And now there's this, and now it's going to be like, what Gandalf Origins? What are we getting?
Which we might be getting anyway in the Amazon series. Maybe.
Okay.
There is it's conjecture at this point that the meteor
the
guy,
stranger, whatever he's been called,
Gandalf, and I don't know, maybe
it really looks like they're at least trying to make the audience think that he is, whether or not he is.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't see how you could put him in the marketing looking like that and not know people are going to go, oh my god, this must be Gandalf.
Yeah.
It's like young hot Gandalf, basically.
Young hot Gandalf. What?
Yeah, man. I don't know.
We folks, we have been the past 4 weeks of the last trailer that came out and all the other stuff that's coming out. Our head is spinning. We haven't even talked about the soundtrack. We have issues about the soundtrack.
Yeah. Although I will say, listening to it more, my initial reaction was oh, really? And the more I listen to it, the more I'm like, okay, but at the same time, it feels like a missed opportunity to have gotten someone really fresh and really interesting with a really dynamic take on what Middle Earth in the Second Age might sound like.
This is a much more populous, diverse place than the Third Ages, because everybody's dead.
Right?
True.
And with the Southrons being or whatever they're calling them in the show, Sutherlings or whatever, you could have an entirely different musical identity for them than it sounds like. I haven't listened to the soundtrack. This is entirely based on what you guys are saying.
You are correct.
But it just sounds like it's the same as everybody else. It's just
it just doesn't.
We should explain, too, that the soundtrack, well, Howard Shore has done, this has been mentioned before in our previous news updates, so this is not really a surprise. Howard Shore has done the main theme, which is all right, but otherwise it's Bear McCreary, who has done many different TV shows and things.
I like Bear McCreary as a composer, I think.
Yeah, he's not bad, but, the thing that leapt out with me is that for the most part, and this is the case I will hammer home, I fully will get that familiarity may let's start to sink in some bit more. that's just the matter of course. But if there's a distinct issue I have with it, is just that the elements of interesting, random, out of nowhere, in the best way, instrumentation choices that Howard Shore pulled off is totally absent here. I'm just not sensing it. The classic example I like to give now is the main Rohan theme that he did, the Hardringar, the Norwegian fiddle or violin or whatever it was, which has that wonderful lends, that famous string part, that wonderfully elegant, I don't want to say unearthly, but very much different kind of tone. I'm not sensing that here. I have seen, I think Oriana, you might have shared it, like some like hyper composer nerds are going, oh, he did this and he did this and he made this thing. I was like, that sounds really great on an instrumentation point of view in terms of composing. I will acknowledge that. But if the impact isn't felt, I don't know. Then it becomes a little sort of different thing.
It's kind of baffling for Bear McCreary, too, not to take that opportunity to go wild with instrumentation. Because, I've listened to the Battlestar Galactica soundtrack a lot, and he does some interesting things there.
And it's not that he doesn't do any interesting things, but it is... And I think this might be because this is a soundtrack and we're not hearing snippets in context, which is, what a score really is. So because we're hearing the full songs, for better, for lack of a better term, I guess, they all kind of fit in the same pattern where we crescendo up to a choral. What's the peak of a crescendo called? I don't know music stuff.
I think it is a crescendo.
Oh, that is just okay.
The crescendo is
crescendo is whatever. We we build to this choral and horn, and it's a lot of choral and horn stuff over and over again. And I think that might just be their songs on a soundtrack instead of stuff within context, but it is kind of okay, all right.
But even Shore kept it varied on the
because
you can do it.
I don't know.
I wanted that Sauron number to be real creepy and dissonant and weird, and it wasn't quite that.
It's just standard bad guy stuff.
Yeah. The if I have a standout moment, and it's not like it is unaccomplished, but if I had a standout moment, it was actually the bit where it's literalizing the thing that I still am almost the most intrigued about, which is the dwarves singing to find the Mithril.
Yeah.
And Sophia Novete, who plays I think their name's the character who is the fiancée or married to the prince of Moria, who literally is that is actually her singing, and I thought she pulled off a great, as I said at the time, Elisa Gerardish type approach in terms of just sort of okay, all right, good, I'm liking that. So that was it stood out almost though by example, and then being followed up by, nothing against her, but being followed up by the sort of hobbity Irish anthem that happened after that was kind of a sad accidental contrast.
My issue with that song has nothing to do with the singer herself or
she was
anything.
Fine.
She's great.
She was great.
Is the lyrics? I really didn't like the lyrics at all. There's a lyric about my legs are so short and the road is so long or something. I was I can't.
Yeah, that's right. They forced the road metaphor, didn't they? Oh dear, I'd forgotten about that.
Why would a hobbit sing in those terms?
Yeah, they would not be talking.
They talk about the big people, and we're the normal ones as their POV.
Exactly.
Typically, they wouldn't be oh, my legs are so short. I'm just a little hobbit. I'm merely short. I'm 5 feet tall. It would never occur to me to talk about how short my legs are. That's just not really a thing. But if you're a halfling, you've got to talk about how short you are.
It's the only thing. It's the only thing that's I don't know, man. Lots of weird choices
here. You have one physical characteristic. You got to mention it as often as possible. Otherwise, people won't know that you have it.
In song, memorialized in song. I don't know, man.
So vitally important. So
yeah.
And and again, the initial the press embargo has dropped at this point. So initial formal reactions are now coming out. If you don't know about the whole idea of press embargoes, let's just say there's a reason why you suddenly see reviews on things appear all at the same time.
Yeah.
For any movie, really. Check it out sometime.
The review, has the review embargo dropped, or was it just the social media reaction embargo
dropped. I'm sick.
I haven't seen any reviews.
So. No formal reviews yet. I'm guessing we'll get something. I'm guessing we'll probably get something tomorrow or Tuesday is when the first long reviews.
That
Yeah,
would be a
'cause it's-
really weird late embargo for the reviews.
Right, but we've seen them out there, and there's been a lot of positive stuff. Although as somebody I know noted, sort of like, boy, there's sure a lot of things talking about how the epic scope is there.
I almost muted the word epic on Twitter because I couldn't take it anymore. Is that really the only word we can use to describe this show? Really?
And the reason why it doesn't help, and this is me being incredibly biased. Okay, so we've looked at all the older trailers and talked about them all this point. The last trailer that dropped, speaking from my heart, was the worst. It was basically a whole lot of declamatory moments for the most part.
Yeah.
And it really landed badly. I was sharing it out with, a couple of friends who are interested enough in the series, but not liking this hyper than us. I basically said, like, I'm not sold on this trailer. And everyone's reaction was just like, oh my God, that's awful. It's sort of like, if this is your selling point and trailer, yeah, I don't know. I mean, as to continue a point that I think that, or that both of you, I think, brought up, the fact that they are obviously not going to tell us everything. They haven't told us everything yet. They're not going to. There are surprises. All we have to do is look at other shows earlier this year where they pulled rabbits out of the hats that they carefully hid in the trailers. Good example, the Obi-Wan series on Star Wars. It wasn't until the series actually dropped that everyone suddenly realized, oh, the focus isn't young Luke, it's young Leia. Now, I'm not saying we're going to get something necessarily like that here, but, clearly there's certainly stuff that will be like, our assumptions will probably be blown up to some degree or another. But if you're just doing with sort of like it reduces that end trailer, really reduced Tolkien down to this sense of people giving these vaguely inspirational speeches and things like that and all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, that's a hard sell, man. That's not necessarily how I would be framing this. So
it seems to be treating evil as an external force that needs to be sort of physically fought. And some of the stuff like Galadriel's, talking about her brother having hunted down the enemy. And
Brother's Quest or whatever.
What are you talking about? It's just not a
That's not what
thing.
he was doing. None of them were doing. Like, I forget how many brothers she had. Like, I think it was I don't remember how many she had.
I want to say it was three.
They were just like, I think at most there was like the siege of Angband. Like that, they weren't like
the thing that Finrod does is he abandons his own kingdom to help Baron. To help some guy.
From the elf point of view, just some, like, we know who Baron is.
Help a guy
doesn't know at that point.
Can't marry this girl he likes until he gets a big shiny jewel. Like, and he dies helping him do that. That's cool.
That totally works
that.
as a story. It's so good. It's just like he wasn't hunting down evil. If that's the brother we're talking about,
it has to be. The other two just kind of die in battle.
But that's the thing too. If it's Finrod, if it is him, the bit they've been showing of him, besides him being dead, is in battle. But that's not how he dies.
No, and like the way he dies is so cool.
Like he does the rap battle against Sauron,
they have the singing battle.
And Finrod fell before the throne. Yes.
But like,
and then Sauron sends the wolf. Yeah, but that's still really cool. It's just not
cool.
Sauron.
That stuff is so metal. Like, why
Finrod
would you...
killing off werewolf after werewolf? Yeah, it's great.
So cool. And why would you change that for something that?
How is it more interesting to have Galadriel be like, I'm going to complete my brother's quest?
If
which
it
is
even is him, are we getting collapsed brothers here? That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah,
that looked like Fingon's death, if anything. Admittedly, no Balrog, but that's who it reminded me of. And I'm like, if we're getting that, that's a real no.
Well, what gets me really is. This feels, I don't.
I mean, we could all be wrong. In a few days, we could be wrong. Turns out we're all wrong. Let's be honest here.
I don't know. I'm not second guessing myself here, but it feels like such a base level silly objection to make. But why do we what matters is that this woman is completing this man's quest. Like, she can't have her own character arc. She has to complete a man's. That seems like a real 2014 Tumblr critique of something. But at the same time, Galadriel is a very important character, and I don't think on her
On
own,
her
and
own.
it doesn't. Yeah, it makes her less interesting
Yes.
to me if she's like, oh, well, my brother did this, so I have to.
It is over. It's that thing. I can't remember if I was only talking about it on the panel I did with Luke Shelton on his podcast.
Oh yeah, that's right. Forgot to mention that. We'll link that too.
Or if we were talking about this in Slack, or if we talked about it on the last episode.
I think it comes up a lot.
It comes
does.
up a lot, but it's this thing where I have encountered in talking with other TV writers and studio execs, and it is the problem of over motivation. People insisting on there being a much more personal, what they consider a more personal, realistic motivation. In this case, it's not enough for Galadriel to simply want, she gets rumors.
She cares
somehow.
on her own.
She cares on her own that, like, oh, hold on a second. This guy who was like the lieutenant of the big enemy is still out there, unaccounted for. I'm going to find him. I have my issues with that. But, like, fine. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
But to then go, but we need this extra.
But this time it's personal.
Yeah. We need, but, like, it was my brother who, and it's like, no. We don't. Why do we need that? We don't.
Because there's only so many ways things can be personal sometimes.
It's such a hat on a hat. She already has the motivation. You don't need to, especially when you have, like, you don't have access to the Finrod story anyway, theoretically, to tell. So, like, is that why they changed it?
But do we know? Like,
but also, do
we're
they?
getting the two trees. Who knows what's going on here? Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, one of the themes is Valinor listed. I mean, that's making me wonder in the soundtrack that's going on there. And just, again, we could make this a whole, for the whole episode. We do have a topic, and we'll get to it. But
we do actually have a topic.
We do have a topic.
we do have a topic, but besides random, but a couple of other points to bring up before we go to that. And again, the episodes may answer all our questions, but J.A. Bayona, who directed the first two episodes, which is what will be premiering first, they're putting out 2 episodes initially, and those are the ones that have already been screened at some of these premiere events, so it's what people are reacting to. Had a really comment, and I'm alive for the fact this is him oversimplifying a situation potentially, but he had some sort of very strange comment about like how each of the areas being focused on, which generally speaking are our own Harfoots, our elves, and the men in Numenor. Plus we got the dwarves, of course. Is that and then other things too. His statement along the lines of, well, you see, if you're interested in things that's more political, that'll be the elves, whereas the men are more melodramatic. And I'm like, okay, hold on.
The elves they're fueled by drama.
Yeah.
Like
Feanor is the most melodramatic creation in the entire legendarium.
The men are the political ones.
They're the ones who are like deciding whether to like sail and do slavery and stuff like that. That's very political.
The elves are just some tree huggers. Like
they're like
like they're doing things. They've got their kingdoms or whatever, but they are not political creatures in the way that men, famously, according to Aristotle, are. We don't really have much insight at all into like elvish government because there isn't really elvish government. There's sort of a you've got a king, but they don't seem to do much king stuff. Like they lead people into battle when they need to. But they're currently what does Gil-galad do on a daily basis besides wear what appears to be like golden pleather? Well, I mean, we've all been there. Like
Lee Pace had a role model.
I'm just saying.
It is. I don't know, man.
Maybe it's just me. I don't know, but
we all have things that we sort of lock into. It's true. So, well, to just go over this again, you'll be hearing this on the if everything works out right. If not, something file got lost somewhere.
It's
which
gonna be so
hopefully
dated, like instantly.
Yeah, exactly. This episode is going to, which is again, this episode is due to drop on the Thursday morning before everything hits. It will officially premiere streaming on Amazon Thursday, September 1st at 6 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time out here. And then after that, it will drop at 9 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time for the rest of the subsequent Thursdays. There's a schedule out. It'll wrap up by mid-October. So we'll have more things to say a little bit down the road about the entirety of the series. There is going to be the special big screening thing, free screening thing they put at a bunch of theaters out there on Wednesday night of those first 2 episodes. I've got a ticket to see that in San Francisco. So we'll We'll see what it's like. But
I don't, because in LA, the closest Cinemark theater is 20 miles away, and I don't have a car, and there's no way to get there by bus. So thanks, Amazon. Also, like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty salty about like, I used to work with the people on the Amazon PR team like a lot. Looking at the people
they didn't invite you to their screen.
Sounds really petty and whatnot, but that is like, oh, so
Oriana,
you invited all these kind of random, podcast people with blog spots, but really, really, this is all right. I see how it is. Maybe they listened to a few too many of these. Yeah.
They fear your power. So.
Look, there's a reason no one talks about the cable channel Viceland anymore. I'll just leave it at that.
Oriana has killed and she will kill again.
Just taking down Amazon.
Right,
After just a petty slight. Oh my god. That's very elvish.
Yeah. It is, actually. Yeah. You maintain a grudge for a long, long time. You've sworn an oath. The one story we'll link that was in Business Insider or Insider, whatever they call it these days, that was about as much as we're getting in terms of a peek inside what Amazon's thinking are, did remind me that one, okay, business officially isn't in charge anymore. It's that Andy Jassy guy. And two, people have names. And the interest may well simply no longer be as committed there if Bezos was the prime mover absolutely early on. Mm-hmm. But now it's got to this point. Again, office politics, who knows?
We'll also see, Amazon will release some numbers that are entirely garbage, I'm sure. But that's just what everyone does these days, standard operating procedure.
Yeah, nobody's auditing those.
Right, I encourage everyone listening, do not believe those numbers, and please, don't. There's, very few people who actually analyze them correctly. But a month after premiere, probably, we will see Nielsen ratings, we will have Nielsen numbers in terms of how many minutes of it were viewed, and so that will paint a much more accurate picture, and that will be interesting to see.
All right, we may well see that, have something about for the next episode, but that'll be for the next episode.
Yeah,
life goes on, and actually talking about Tolkien itself is prime. So, moving sort of our shift here. This may be a little more, smaller in comparison to other things, but we've had a lot to talk about. And again, this is kind of our building on the live stream we did last week to a degree, but a little more, focused. You could say at this point, it is Jared's choice of topics. So please go right ahead.
Food in Tolkien. I think I mentioned a particular viral tweet at the end of the last episode as the prompt for this one. It kind of was, kind of wasn't. I've been thinking about a food episode for a while, mostly because my sister, who was on the live stream, kept saying that she wanted to be on one, but I couldn't figure out what to say about it. But seeing that tweet really got me thinking. The premise of the tweet, and we can link to it or not, I don't want even more traffic. I don't care. I hated the tweet. The premise is that Lord of the Rings is basically one of those recipe blogs where you have to dig through someone's entire autobiography to get to the recipe for Gruyere mac and cheese or whatever, which, can I just say, smoked Gouda mac and cheese is where it's at, but that's beside the point. The tweet relies on the notion that Lord of the Rings contains several detailed descriptions of meals. I'm not here to argue with the tweet, I swear. This is a petty episode.
Yes, yes.
But this is wrong. The tweet's wrong. Hobbits are famous eaters and cooks, but food is surprisingly absent from Tolkien. There are very, very few meals described in any detail, not only in Lord of the Rings, but in The Hobbit, and certainly not in the Silmarillion. This isn't freaking Redwall. But that got me thinking about the times where food does show up, and why it shows up, and what it's doing there. The most famous food is probably lembas. Either that or potatoes. You don't really know what lembas tastes like, better than honey cakes apparently, but that's not the most specific description. It was just it's better than this one thing. Okay. But we do know what it looks like, and it's sort of magical in the way that elf stuff is nebulously magical. Listen to the episode of Magic. We don't talk about lembas, but we talk about nebulously magical. The second most famous food in Tolkien might be Sam's rabbit stew, which if you missed the cooking live stream we did, let me tell you, Samwise Gamgee is a hell of a chef. Third might be the unexpected party at the beginning of The Hobbit. You got seed cake and pickles and so on, with the dwarves as restaurant guests from hell, and Bilbo's a poor little waiter. After that, it probably depends on famous meals, depends on whether you read the books. I mean, there's all the bread and honey and cream and butter and whatever that Bilbo and the dwarves eat with Beorn, and there's all the little side bits about eating mutton or rabbit or whatever. There's the Mirrorvor of Rivendell. There's the meal shared with the elves before the hobbits leave the Shire, which is it's almost elemental, right? It's bread, fruit, some kind of drink. There's dinner at Farmer Maggots, beer, a dish of bacon and mushrooms, other solid farmhouse fare, unquote. There's the dinner at the Prancing Pony, which I'm not going to keep listing foods, but like it's basic kind of English food. There's the snack Pippin has a Denethor, white cakes and red wine, okay, followed by the much more satisfying stuff he has with Baragon, which is like bread, butter, cheese, apples, ale. There's the food that Sam and Frodo eat with Faramir and Henneth Anun, which is again like a lot of bread and butter and like dry fruit and stuff. This one specifically mentions good red cheese and white wine, which I think is interesting. That all sounds like a lot, even though I didn't list literally everything. But given the sheer volume of writing here, like these are long books, it's surprising that there isn't more, especially given the coziness that people tend to accept as essential to the Tolkien brand. So we mostly don't know about food, actually. He gives us enough to build a mental image of the cultural and ecological environments here, basically, different flavors of Europe. But for the most part, the specifics are completely lacking. We have a pretty good sense of how hobbits eat, like British people from about 1700 to 1940. Not many spices, a lot of ale, the sturdy food of an agricultural people, essentially. We have a vague sense of how humans in the same regions of the Shire eat, which is basically the same as hobbits, and we know at least what Gondorians on military rations are doing. But what is elf cuisine like? What is the signature dish of Lorien, and how is it different from a banquet in Rivendell? What do dwarves cook? Do the Easterlings drink kumis? Do the Haradrim make mamul? Do the people of Dol Amroth make squid ink pasta and profit from the spice trade? We have no idea. It's gone. Part of this, I think, has to do with the conceit of the stories, that the good old Red Book, hobbits don't have a word for squid ink, I'm sure. If Prince Imrahil longingly mentioned the pasta from home, how are they supposed to record that? But that's also, I think that's not what food is doing here. From my not quite exhaustive list, you may notice something important. All of those really detailed meals are shared, and many of them mark transition points and building of trust between parties. There's some correspondence between the specificity of the food and how much we're supposed to trust the people offering it. Beorn is terrifying and almost dangerously jolly, and he stresses me out so much. Also, he's a werebear, but his sweet, creamy, homemade food indicates almost from the beginning that he's trustworthy. Pippin is intimidated by Minas Tirith and its people, and dissatisfied with the ostentatiously simple meal like this like haute cuisine, like Instagram Denethor snack. But when that's followed by some very hobbity food with Baragon, it's a strong sign that though all might not be well at the top, these are decent people, outside of the tower. And Sam cooking rabbit stew for Frodo, the only meal, interestingly enough, for which we get an actual glimpse into the process of hobbit cooking, can hardly be read as anything but an expression of love and comfort in the wilderness. It's such a sweet scene, and you get all the steps. It's so drawn out. It's all of the detail is there. The other thing going on here was probably more significant to Tolkien, and that's the Eucharistic stuff going on with Lembas. This is my body broken for you, etc. It's a gift of the semi-divine elves associated with the queenly figure, and nourishes the soul as well as the mind. The Mirror, the alcoholic stuff, dispensed by Elrond, could possibly be read as the wine accompanying Lembas, but I don't want to chase that too far, because who knows? What matters more is that the more one depends on Lembas, the more it nourishes you. I don't know enough about Catholic Eucharistic theology to take that much further, but we can get back to it, assuming anyone here was raised Catholic. So my thesis, I don't know, maybe. So my thesis here, I guess, is that food in Tolkien is nearly always transformative. But rather than talk about that immediately, I have a softball question for this very softball episode. What meal do you most want to be a part of?
Boy, yeah,
I think for me, it's the elves at Woody End, Woodhall.
Yeah,
Woodhall.
Yeah,
Woody.
Woody End. Wait, isn't that?
That's from something. What is that? Never mind.
I think there is a Woody End somewhere in the Shire. Anyway, but the elves at Woodhall.
But Woodhall is though.
That's great. I was thinking like maybe the end drafts, but like that just feels kind of unsatisfying, as a meal. But yeah,
specifically called out in the text as
right. You're like, oh, you kind of
you need something to chew,
just a little nibble. But yeah, I think that would be my choice, just as like kind of it's Sam's real introduction to the elves, and they feed him, and it's just regular wholesome food. But as someone who like just started to bake my own bread, it's very satisfying and so tasty. It's so tasty. You're like, I made this, and it tastes better because I did. Just bread and butter. It's delicious.
It's very true, very true. That the Woodhall meal is definitely just, an atmospheric moment. The Star Guy in B2, it's just like, okay, everything's together.
Yeah.
And Baragon, the moment, because it's just a great picnic lunch. I just love it. And just the
so
sense
nice.
of it, just being out on the battlements to this huge seat, seeing the sweep below you, and just having it's like, that sounds really nice. Those are probably my two standout moments for those reasons. I'm both communal to a degree, although the part of me that likes, just going to a restaurant, having a spot on my own is like, at least in the before times, since we're still where we're at right now. But in sort of building off this idea, two points, I guess, about food, or maybe lack thereof, sort of stand out. First, as you said, Jared, we see food for the most part at moments of transition, as you said the word, and other sort of like, particular moments is where the food stands out. Otherwise, we really don't get anything. Like a good example, for instance, is in the initial stretch from Rivendell to, let's say, Moria or even beyond. We don't know what they've got with them. What is Bill laden up with? Do they have? Is the equivalent of jerky? Is it sausages? Is it things like that? Yeah,
Right?
What
hardtack?
Yeah,
What do they have?
We have no sense of that at all. Interestingly, of course, the idea is that it is shown as Sam in the movie version is shown as carrying this stuff a little more there. It's almost like they put in a little bit of extra realism. As someone else noted, I forget who. I think I might even one of the commentaries. There is that bit in the extended edition of Fellowship of the Ring where you have a brief bit where Aragorn comes. Well, they're still going to Rivendell, and he's shot a deer with an arrow and feed that. And the idea is sort of like, here is a practical step. You need to keep going. What do? You go out and you hunt your food. And I'm like, that's actually a good point. Again, Tolkien doesn't talk about that, but then again, you feel like presumably he doesn't feel like it's that important. It's more sort of like it's there, it's understood, they're doing a thing, but we're not going to dwell on it. And
we're just going to assume they've got these rations with them since they're living.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
They stay alive the whole time.
They're hungry, but they are still more or less like eating something. It's kind of like, you don't see all the bathroom breaks and
Yes,
famously.
Thankfully, no. That, believe it or not, we're going to refer back to the Dennis L. McKiernan Silver Call duology. There is a brief coded mention of having those breaks in there, so you could argue it's like, okay, he got that bit of realism right. Thanks. But the setting on that side. The other point I wanted to bring up is that I think the thing that I think is most interesting on a deprivation level of food, let's say, is when we get Frodo and Sam in Mordor, and it really isn't the food, it's the drink, it's the water, it's the thirst. That is what I get from them most of all. I mean, you get a sense of hunger pangs, but somehow they have enough energy to keep going with whatever bits of limbus what it is. It's the thirstiness that really is there, and not in an Instagram sense. the actual, you are running out of water big time because you're in a desert type thing, which is a truer form of dying quickly, frankly, in comparison to eating food. So I think that's a very good point. And these points of sort of like, you could say hunger. I mean, on the one hand, there's like Pippin's little rueful moment of it when he's woken up by Gandalf and having had these initially nice little meals when he got to Gondor, he only gets like a bit of bread and a bit of thin milk, and that's all he gets. That's like the simplest meal I think anyone gets. And I think that's a nice reflection of, Tolkien, being a soldier on watching World War I when you didn't have enough to go around or whatever, and you sort of had to make do things. I'm sure that was come from the life. But then another character who essentially is defined by hunger, and not the only one, of course, is Gollum, who is eternally hungry, and dreaming of fish and wanting food and not able to eat proper food or things like that. He is, of course, the contrast to the rabbit stew. Sam's like, I heard all this, and what is he doing? No, what are you doing? This sort of these contrasting things about what nourishes what is seen to be the right sort of thing to have. To leave it there for now.
I'd want to talk about that a bit more. Luke brought this up on the live stream about consumption as an act of evil or as a trait of evil. Like Gollum is always hungry and he doesn't really care what he eats. He almost eats Bilbo, or like the orcs are also always talking about, not always, but they have to talk a lot about like eating and like the hand that gives us man flesh to eat, that kind of thing. Like they want to consume and they don't really spend much time on cuisine. They're just like, here's some bread and like dried meat, whatever. Do you guys have any further thoughts about that? We couldn't really get into it too much on the stream, but about consumption and hunger and who's doing the consuming.
Right. I mean, I think sort of like if my understanding is correct, at least in the cosmology as much as it was, formally set up the first time, this sense of, there's desire which you could argue is what Morgoth was driven by. But the first time there is a sense of, total actual consuming hunger is someone like Ungoliant.
I was hoping somebody would bring that up.
Because
I wouldn't have to.
Yeah, so Ungoliant is thirsting for light and destroying light, and you can say thirsting, you say hungry for it, but the idea is, just, taking it in, consuming it.
Yeah.
And it is,
she eats it.
Yeah, it is an action that she is not wanting to conquer light. She is not wanting to defeat light. She is wanting to devour light.
Yes.
And that is, and seeing it in those terms, it is seen as something that's so utterly absolute that even Morgoth arguably is like,
oh God, I gotta get away from this
freaks
chick.
even him out.
Yeah. And of course, famously, the idea is that she is so hungry in the end she devours herself. Nice work if you can get it. How do you eat your own teeth? But this sense too of the Shelob's hunger, etc. The spiders and Mirkwood. I mean, there's a theme that's just spiders. We could do a whole episode on them. But this sense of our hunger as a thing. I mean, you could turn it into metaphorical hunger if you like. What is Numenor if not wanting the hunger of conquering the world? But veers into questions of imperialism and all that. But maybe to take it back to the food level, I mean, I like sort of shifting gears. I like moments of unexpected delight about food in Tolkien.
Yeah.
And for me, a classic example is when Gimli encounters Limbus. Cram.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, this is wonderful.
This actually rules. Yeah.
Human reactions around food and drink and companionship. A lovely bit about, you mentioned Farmer Maggot and having this wonderful hearty meal. I just like the fact that Sam is enjoying the beer, but he's sipping his beer suspiciously at first because he's sort of like, these guys beat Frodo, I don't know. But then he talks about later that his suspicions were allayed thanks in part due to the excellence of the beer. I love moments like that. Sort of like, oh, okay, you can eat this. Those are fine little moments. Those are nice small moments in a big literary work.
The delight in food that occasionally, as you mentioned, brings up something that I don't know how much of a thing to make out of this, but it is very, very interesting to me that food, as far as I can remember, in the entire Legendarium even, is not a source of temptation. A lot of fantasy stories or fairy tales or whatever have like the food that you can't eat.
Yeah.
If you eat it, something bad happens to you.
Yeah.
Or like in Chronicles of Narnia, there's like people have like, they've read fairy tales, they know they shouldn't eat this food, or Edmund is tempted by Turkish delight. Yeah, famously. But that doesn't show up here, and the only thing that it kind of happens with is like characters wanting to eat people.
Right. It is interesting.
But like that's not the same thing. Nobody's like, Sam's never like, oh, I shouldn't eat like in Mordor or whatever. Nobody's like, here's this forbidden orc food. Like there's not that kind of.
Yeah, they resist eating like bits of like things where they're not too sure what flesh of strange animals are.
But nobody's ever like, I don't know, this enchanted food. Like even in Lorien, where you'd think somebody would go, can we eat what Galadriel gave? Even like Boromir might be like, Galadriel gave us this food. Can we actually eat it without falling under her enchantment? And there's no moment where anybody is like, no, dude, it's fine.
Which you would expect given the close tie, thematic tie that the elves have with the fae of actual fairy tales,
which makes it more baffling to me that it's not an element.
It is really interesting. Maybe it might have been a conscious departure. Like, okay, I am basing these people on these stories of the ancient Celtic, the people of the Sidhe, but here's where I'm going to depart from that. Like, here's where
gotta draw the line somewhere.
Gotta draw the line, and it's enchanted food. If you eat their food, you will not be stuck with them forever. Unlike in all of the fairy tales. It's
not enchanted food now that I think about it, but there is a sense of enchantment around one particular meal I can think of, actually more than one, and those are the meals held that are served by Tom Bombadil and Goldberry. And the sense that the food itself is not necessarily magical, but there's a magic about it. It's sort of like they can't quite remember what they had, but they feel themselves starting to sing more naturally, as much as talk, and how refreshing the water that they drink is, and things like this. A very interesting sort of eruption, as so much about Tom Bombadil is in terms of the Middle Earth cosmology, upsetting it to a strange degree.
That is like the Lembas is not physically enchanted, but it is sort of blessed by.
It's on another level.
It is like the grain that they use to make Lembas was originally brought from Valinor, from one of these sort of semi-gods, for them to cook and eat on their long journey. And it's interesting to me that Tolkien, this is from the book The Nature of Middle-earth, where there's a like 2 paragraphs specifically about lembas and talking about how the making of lembas, the cultivation of the grain that you make into lembas is anyone can do it, but lembas was specifically, the making of that was a secret given to the bread women. And Galadriel is, I guess, kind of one of the last surviving people in Middle-earth to actually know it. And that's why Elrond, I guess, doesn't know how to make lembas. That's really interesting to me, given the very Eucharistic feel that lembas has. It is like, because it's this fun play on the man cannot live on bread alone.
Yeah.
But you can live on lembas, but you can actually live on lembas alone. And, it is this like kind of sacred, blessed bread that
which is intentional. I mean, this is, I think it's in the letters where he talks about like, this is one of the few places where actual, like, you can tell this is a Catholic author, which not everybody can tell because,
because not everyone is really into that.
It is, if you know what you're looking for, it is very much, it's there.
Yeah.
One thing that food sort of on a broader conceptual level, and we've talked about this in our Shire episode, sort of functions in the Shire very specifically about how when, they have to scour it, when Saruman, et cetera, as everyone's taken over, there is want at that point. There is, food is hoarded. Things are not so good. And then when everything is restored, the harvests are incredibly plentiful. The beer is of a surpassing excellence. Everything's sort of like, the idea
the Hobbit
that
children are bathing in strawberries and cream.
Yeah. Wonderful image. So, so stuff like that, it is, the idea that, again, there's more than getting by. There is this idea that there are like, extra levels of things that can happen. But it is very kind of, I think you were saying, Jared, sort of elemental, basic English food is the concept of it. It's the idea that sort of like, even today, one of the things, again, we were talking about in the live stream, and I was pulling examples of early, like, fan submitted, what would these things be like? And the idea is the emphasis is always, good, hearty fare, is the idea. It's meant to be uncomplicated. It is not made, what spices exactly? What are those? Noodles? What are those?
We got
rice?
Herbs.
What is that?
We got some herbs and some salt.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. Which is one of those things like it's a starting point. But it's something that it reads much more differently, especially these days, even in a couple of generations, expectations about like, what you can or can't have or what a table is supposed to have. I mean, if you like, this is a terrible oversimplification, but if you were doing something over there in England right now, or someone writing it, they didn't have an equivalent, like even something as basic as a curry, people would be like, what are you talking about? We eat this all the time, and all that. So it just sort of, or if he'd been here in California, what do you put in the equivalent of Mexican food? You never know. So, these are the type of things that could have happened. Gosh. So the stew was good that you made.
It was very good. And
it
was so good. And I just made stock with the bones.
Yes.
So
nice.
Ooh.
I know we're kind of getting close to the time.
We got a little more.
Where do you think the popular misconception of Tolkien comes from, that it's like a work that revolves around food? Because it really doesn't. And I don't know why people seem to think that it does when it's so conspicuously absent, except for a very few occasions, and it's never described in so much detail, very much detail, except for like with the elves in Woodhall, and even then it's like it was indescribably good.
Yeah,
it was it was so good that it like was better than anything else. Like, okay, but that's it. There's no detail. There's no feasts in the halls of Minas Tirith. There's nothing like that. Whereas like a lot of other fantasy that I would consider like much cozier. I don't know, like Redwall is like, and then they had delicious scones with nuts in them,
dandelion
and clotted cream,
and
green sap cheese, or like, okay, you get all of the detail, and there's none, and it's.
I think if I had to guess, it's because, and this is just sort of hitting me just now, is that The Hobbit is arguably more food-centric than The Lord of the Rings in many ways.
Oh, absolutely.
Is really what it comes down to. And if you're primed for that, you read Hobbits through that, then you tend to read everything a little more through that, and almost sort of implicitly carries over. I mentioned about how in Lord of the Rings, the real torture for Frodo and Sam towards the end is thirst. In The Hobbit, we do get a sense of where food light comes in when the Bilbo and the Dwarves are lost in Mirkwood. and they can't eat anything. That's where hunger actually comes in terms of a stretch where you can't eat anything. And much of what happens along the way, there is a food element. At one point, the dwarves themselves are about to be cooked, or maybe even raw, and things like that. So you get, I think, this idea that it's sort of like it's more tied up in the Hobbit first, and maybe there's this sort of lingering after effect that carries over in Lord of the Rings. I'm not sure. It's a very good question, though.
I have a theory. My theory is that it's bleed through from other fantasy works. I do think that people know that The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit kind of were the start.
If it's high fantasy, it must be.
Like they were kind of the beginning of the modern fantasy genre, and because of that, all works that include like far too many descriptions of feasts, therefore Lord of the Rings also is like
because
this.
It's the seed from which they came. It must have all of the leaves already in it.
I think it's a backwards projection from a lot of people
that makes total
who
sense.
like they read Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, and are like, oh man, that Lord of the Rings stuff. Like,
yeah, it's totally like that. I think part of it, I think the reason it's missing, it's kind of jumping points, I guess, but like in A Song of Ice and Fire, my impression is, as some people may know, I didn't make it past the first half of the first book because I just hated it, which is a me problem, I'm sure.
You're allowed to not like things, it's fine.
I know, but I hate being yelled at for things that I dislike. So
fair.
He's saying something about the society that produces these feasts, why these feasts are being held, what is being eaten, who is eating them, all of that. And so it's more sociological, and Lord of the Rings is not a sociological book. So it's not interested in why people are eating these things, which doesn't fully explain like why people think that it's doing this. But nobody's like, and then they supped upon young pigeons baked in butter, or like or whatever.
That sounds eerily accurate.
International House of the Dragon pancakes. Thank you very much.
Oh my god.
I'm here to help. We should wrap up. So, any last thoughts there, Jared, about the subject? Which is still a good one. Yeah, we started such a surface, but it's an interesting one to think about for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't answer the question posted at the beginning of what I want to be a part of. I kind of feel like the unexpected party at the beginning of The Hobbit, except for the part where it is an unexpected party, because I would feel like such a heel if I showed up at somebody's house and was like, "Where are the seed cakes? Give me the seed cakes." But
give me all of them seed cakes.
All of the food they have sounds really good, and I love the idea of eating with Gandalf. So.
And, regardless of how the films themselves turned out, I actually think the unexpected party sequence as Jackson filmed is kind of nice, just for that one bit where Martin Freeman just looks at his pantry and it's been devastated because everyone's eating out of the house.
That's solid.
You can live with that.
I would agree.
If you just simply stopped at that after they sung the song and then ended, we'd be like, great, good job.
Cool. Thanks.
Perfect annotation.
No notes.
No notes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look ahead to the next episode. So yes, we are going to talk a little bit about a certain series that will have had a few episodes by then. We will, however, save discussion for the series as a whole for a little later, once we have an entire season to talk about, so we can talk about it a little more coherently. So we've got to talk about something else next time the subject choices come around to me. And having brought up linguistics for the first time properly earlier this year, we're not going back. We're not going back immediately. We will want to go back at some point. I want to talk about another major element. Really, the broad element is more one of, let's say, nature, literally, of Middle-earth. It's something that I've been thinking about. However, I decided I wanted a little more focus and something that's sure chew over, so that way we can sort of fit it into an episode. And that is something I think has been vitally important, really important. Tolkien himself has been quoted on its importance for his creative work, but we haven't really talked about it yet. And that is specifically not geography, cartography. Cartography and maps in Middle-earth and Tolkien and how he used them. And you can extend this out to the idea of fantasy literatures in general and things like this. Some of what I saw at the Marquette exhibition actually made me think of this in terms as well, because some of the maps are on display there. But maps Tolkien, fantasy literature, there's a big association there. It's kind of arguably one of the biggest things that Tolkien very much popularized and that people have used since then. And it's not just, of course, his work, people who created works for him or with him, around him and all that. There's a lot going on. So it's a broad scope still, but something that we have a lot of concrete examples we can draw from throughout his creative work over the decades, his own efforts and other things like that and what fit into that. So that's what we'll be talking about next time. Cartography, maps, Middle-earth, and how we view Middle-earth as readers in as large extent using that. So that'll be our subject for next time. Plenty to look into there. And I will say offhand, if you've not read Karen Wynne Fonstad's The Atlas of Middle-earth, now's the time. So because she is very much one of the key sort of focuses of creating further visual things of Middle-earth on that front. But that's another part of the story we can get into. So, well, yep, here we go. When we started this podcast, the rights had been sold for a couple of years. We knew things were happening, and and we are now finally about here.
Here it comes.
Here it comes. We're gonna see.
So it begins.
So it begins indeed. If this actually begins with someone doing a Galadriel style, if this ends with Galadriel herself in character doing a Galadriel style voiceover at the beginning, I may just pick up something and throw it against the wall. It's like, come on. We've already had all the other fantasy series rip that off. Don't rip yourself off.
Right?
I bet they're going to do it, but it's going to be kind of a jokey thing, the way it is in John Carter, where you think the princess is narrating to the camera and then turns out she's rehearsing a speech. It's going to be that. I'm calling it right now. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Oh, man.
I've never wanted you to be wrong more in my life.
Look, I don't want to be right.
If we want to begin with, have it be like, John Carter, a film which I actually rather enjoy, John Carter, where we hear, Taylor basically, so the screens of Amazon, then say, Mars. Sure. Completely throw my expectations. Go right ahead. Oh dear. A long story there. So John Carter is good, by the way. It's not perfect, but it's good. So
flawed.
Yes,
but it looks great.
It looks fantastic. It absolutely does. And lots of scenery chewing. Really, really wonderful. We could go on. So thank you very much for listening. You'll probably have since maybe gone through this edit. This is going to be one of the quick edited episodes because we had to get this out real quick and things like that. So, but hopefully we hope you've enjoyed and entertained all that. And some of the show notes, the contact information is always in our outro. We appreciate it very much. We will see you next time. We'll all have a lot more to talk about. We'll all have a little more sense about what's going on at long last. We are looking forward to that at the very least. So until next time, we'll see you. Thanks again for listening to this episode of By-The-Bywater. Please subscribe and rate us via your favorite podcast listening options.
Episodes and show notes are at megaphonic.fm/bythebywater, all one word. You can also message us through here. Email us at bythebywater@megaphonic.fm or follow us on Twitter at By-The-Bywater.
You can also follow us individually on Twitter and ask questions there. I'm at Vandroid Helsing.
I'm at Schwinter, SCHWINDTER.
And I'm Ned Raggett, 2 G's, 2 T's. By-The-Bywater is a proud member of Megaphonic Podcast Network. Find all our fancy little shows at megaphonic.fm. We hope you join us again next time. Until then, Namarie.